She walked into the dealership wearing jeans and a simple white t-shirt, inquiring about a luxury car. The salesman looked her up and down with disdain. "I'm sorry, but I think you're in the wrong place," he sneered, gesturing toward the exit. "These vehicles start at $300,000. As other staff members snickered and customers stared, her face flushed with humiliation. She left without a word. The next morning, a gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up outside the dealership. When the back door opened, the salesman's jaw dropped. He never saw it coming. The morning sun glinted off the glass facade of Boston Prestige Auto, casting reflections over the polished exotics parked neatly inside. Ferraris, Bentleys, Lamborghinis, and more, each one tagged with prices most people never even dared to ask about. Margaret Collins, known simply as Maggie to anyone close, walked back through the same entrance, her worn sneakers squeaking softly on the pristine marble floor. Nothing about her outfit had changed. Still the faded tee, still the ponytail, still the same no-frills confidence. But what no one at the dealership could have guessed from her appearance was that she had spent over a decade building a nationally respected nonprofit that had impacted thousands of children with disabilities, including leading some of the most successful early intervention programs in the country. Maggie had never cared much for flashy things, but today she had a reason. Her sister Caroline was turning 40. And after surviving a brutal fight with breast cancer, Maggie decided it was time to fulfill her sister's lifelong dream of owning a luxury coupe. The one that caught her eye? A deep blue, limited edition model sitting on an elevated platform, marked at just under $290,000. While Maggie admired it, the dealership's sales manager, Blake Thompson, noticed her from across the room. Dressed to impress in a crisp suit, he prided himself on identifying buyers before they even spoke. And Maggie, in his eyes, didn't fit the profile. Flashing a smirk to his colleagues, he strolled over, cutting off the young salesman who had politely greeted her. "I'll take care of this," Blake said smoothly, before turning to Maggie with a look that said he'd already dismissed her. "Lost, ma'am. Our pre-owned center is a few blocks west." Maggie's eyes followed his gesture calmly, then returned to the coupe. "Actually," she said with a smile, "I came to look at that one." Blake's jaw tightened. He'd seen it before, people walking in just to gawk, wasting time when he had targets to meet and real buyers expected. "That model's extremely rare," he explained in a patronizing tone. "Only 14 in the country. Might I suggest something more accessible?" Maggie didn't flinch. She was used to this reaction. Most people didn't know she chose a minimal lifestyle despite having the wealth to live any way she wanted. And today, she had no intention of justifying that to anyone. "I'd really like to learn more about this one," she persisted politely. "Would it be possible to see the interior?" Blake's expression tightened with barely disguised annoyance. Nearby, two sales associates exchanged smirks. "That model requires an appointment," he replied smoothly, though it was a complete fabrication. "We usually reserve private showings for clients with scheduled visits." Just then, a couple dressed head to toe in designer labels stepped into the dealership, and in an instant, Blake's energy shifted. "Please excuse me," he said to Maggie without so much as making eye contact. "Daniel can get you a brochure." Then, like flipping a switch, he smiled broadly and strode toward the newcomers. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, what a pleasure to see you again." Daniel, the young salesman from earlier, returned to Maggie with an apologetic look on his face. Barely in his mid-20s and swimming in an oversized jacket, he offered gently, "I'm really sorry about that. Would you still like some details about the Azure?" "Yes," Maggie nodded. "I'd appreciate that." As Daniel began walking her through the specs and features with genuine enthusiasm, Maggie glanced over to see Blake now personally escorting the Harrington straight to the very same coupe he claimed was off limits. He pulled open the passenger door dramatically, inviting Mrs. Harrington to slide in. "This model has a long reservation list," he said proudly, "but I've managed to set aside one for clients like yourselves." Mrs. Harrington ran a manicured hand across the dashboard. "It's stunning," she said, "but I'm unsure about the color." "We can talk about customization," Blake offered quickly. Maggie quietly stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said in a calm voice. "I was hoping to ask about purchasing this car." Blake's eyes narrowed. "As I explained earlier, this car is being viewed by another customer," he said through clenched teeth. "Perhaps you could come back later, or visit our pre-owned section. It's quite nice." The Harringtons glanced between Maggie and Blake, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm specifically interested in this one," Maggie continued. "It's for my sister's birthday next month." Blake took a step closer and dropped his voice. "Look," he said, clearly agitated. "Some folks like to dream big, but this isn't a fantasy lot. That car costs more than some people make in 5 years. I've been patient, but you're interfering with a real sale. The tension drew the attention of others nearby, and several customers stopped browsing to watch. Daniel shifted nervously a few steps behind Maggie, clearly unsure whether to step in. I'm prepared to purchase it today, in full, Maggie replied without raising her voice. That's when Blake's restraint gave out. He let out a loud, dry laugh that echoed through the showroom. Heads turned. A full payment? In cash? He repeated mockingly. This isn't a flea market. That car is just under $300,000. People who buy vehicles like this don't walk in wearing— He waved a hand over her clothing dismissively. Whatever that is. Maggie's face flushed, not out of shame, but with a cold, growing fury. Not for herself. She had dealt with this before. But for everyone who had ever been looked down on for not meeting someone else's idea of wealth. I believe my payment is just as valid as anyone else's, she said evenly. Blake leaned in, clearly enjoying his assumed authority. Let's be honest, he said, not even trying to lower his voice anymore. You're wasting everyone's time. Either come back with an appointment and dressed appropriately, or leave. This is a serious dealership. The entire floor went silent. The Harringtons had stepped back from the car, no longer interested. Then a new voice cut through the quiet. Is there an issue here? It was Richard Mason, the dealership's owner, who had approached after noticing the growing attention. Blake straightened instantly. No issue, sir, he said quickly. Just informing this woman that our high-end models require appointments for serious buyers. Richard scanned the scene. The nervous Daniel, the uncomfortable couple, the crowd of curious eyes, and Maggie, calm but clearly insulted. I see, he said carefully. And your name is? Collins, Maggie answered. Margaret Collins. Richard nodded slowly, eyes narrowing with recognition. Miss Collins, maybe there's been a misunderstanding. Our clientele typically, well, they understand the exclusivity of our vehicles. I understand perfectly, Maggie replied, her voice calm even as the sting of public humiliation tightened in her chest. Your sales manager has been crystal clear about your standards. Blake stepped closer, the arrogance in his tone thick enough to cut through. If you're truly serious, which I doubt, you can schedule an appointment, though I'd recommend bringing proof of income next time, and dressing more appropriately. These cars, he added, gesturing around the showroom like a museum curator, are meant for a certain type of buyer. A quiet ripple moved through the nearby crowd. Someone laughed under their breath. Maggie glanced around at the stares, the judgment, Blake's self-satisfied grin, and the silence from the dealership's owner who still hadn't spoken up. She'd experienced bias before, but rarely this naked, this loud, this sanctioned. I see, she said, her voice still composed. With her chin high and dignity unshaken, she turned and headed for the door. Just as she pushed through the glass, she heard Blake mutter, "Some people really don't know their place." Outside, the morning sun hit her face, and for a moment she closed her eyes. The hurt was real, but it wasn't hers alone. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, Maggie pulled out her phone. She dialed with steady hands, a small but knowing smile tugging at her lips. On the outskirts of Boston sat the Collins estate, 5 acres of quiet refinement, where wealth whispered rather than shouted. The mansion's sleek design and minimalist elegance gave away nothing of the multi-billion-dollar empire behind its walls. Inside, Alexander Collins, Maggie's husband and the low-profile founder behind one of the world's most groundbreaking renewable energy tech firms, looked up from his workstation as she entered. After 15 years together, he didn't need words to know something had happened. What's wrong? He asked, immediately rising and moving toward her. Maggie sank into the leather chair across from his desk, her expression tight but composed. Let's just say today was informative. She recounted the dealership encounter, Blake's condescension, the subtle cruelty, and the way no one intervened. Alexander listened without interruption, his jaw clenched tighter with each detail, but he let her finish. It's not even about me, she said finally. I have the luxury of walking away and knowing the truth about who I am. But what about the people who deal with this kind of judgment every day and can't prove otherwise? Alexander nodded, recognizing the familiar fire in her eyes. It was what had always drawn him to her, her ability to remain grounded in the face of power, her instinct to fight for more than just herself. What do you want to do about it? He asked. Part of me wants to let it go, she admitted. Just buy Caroline's gift somewhere else and be done with it. But then I think of that young man, Daniel. He treated me with dignity, even when his colleagues didn't. And I think of everyone who's dismissed, minimized, or talked down to because they don't look like they belong. I don't want revenge. I want perspective. Alexander's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. I might know a way to do both. Maggie raised an eyebrow. Please, no buying the building or firing everyone. I'm not interested in that kind of spectacle. He chuckled. No, nothing dramatic. But maybe something they won't forget. Leaning forward, he outlined an idea. Subtle, smart, and effective. Not designed to humiliate, but to educate. To shift the narrative. Are you sure you don't want to be there? He asked when the plan was finalized. Maggie shook her head. This isn't about watching someone squirm. It's about letting them learn who they've underestimated. But I expect a full report. As the evening light faded across their quiet estate, Alexander made a series of phone calls, each one moving a different piece into place for what was to unfold the next day. What was coming wouldn't be about revenge. It would be a masterclass in humility, a reminder of what happens when people judge too quickly and too harshly. It wouldn't just be Blake Thompson who learned that lesson, but the entire staff at Boston Luxury Motors. The next morning arrived wrapped in golden skies and a cool breeze. Inside the dealership, Blake strolled in with his usual swagger, adjusting his trademark cobalt tie and sipping his custom espresso. The incident with the casually dressed woman from the day before had already become a punchline, a story he'd proudly recounted over drinks, a tale of how he'd gracefully redirected someone clearly out of place. He entered the glass-walled showroom like a king returning to court, surrounded by polished displays of power and wealth. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and a Bugatti so rare it had its own spotlight. That morning's team meeting had ended with Blake reminding everyone of the importance of vetting clients. We're not being snobs, he said with a smug grin. We're being efficient. These aren't impulse buys. We serve a very specific type of customer. Daniel, standing near the back, remained quiet, visibly uncomfortable, still thinking about Maggie's quiet dignity the day before. Blake had noticed and mentally filed it away. He planned to remind the young salesman how the business really worked. At exactly 10:17 a.m., the sound of an engine unlike any other broke through the ambient music and casual chatter. Heads turned toward the massive windows just as a sleek machine rolled to a halt directly in front of the main entrance. Even Blake paused. It wasn't just the car, it was the aura. A custom-built Rolls-Royce Phantom, extended wheelbase, with a stunning iridescent finish that shifted subtly from navy to deep violet depending on the light. It looked less like a car and more like royalty on wheels. Blake's pulse ticked up. He'd seen his fair share of luxury, but this was something else. Just then, Richard Mason, the dealership's owner, stepped out of his office, drawn by the sudden silence that had overtaken the floor. That a Phantom EWB? He asked quietly. Blake was already walking toward the doors. Bespoke model, he replied confidently. Custom order, easily over 1.2 million. The chauffeur, clad in formal uniform and white gloves, stepped out with precision and rounded the vehicle to open the rear door. A man stepped out, tall, poised, and dressed in a suit so precise it could only be tailored by hand. His presence carried weight, not in volume, but in gravity. His salt and pepper hair was immaculate, his expression calm and unreadable. Blake's instincts lit up. This wasn't just a high-net-worth client. This was someone with influence, someone who might return again and again. "Good morning, sir," Blake called out, adjusting his tie again and intercepting the man before any other employee could get close. "Blake Thompson, sales manager. Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors. It's an absolute pleasure." The man gave a slight nod, shaking Blake's hand with polite restraint. "Alexander Collins," he said simply. The name tugged at something in Blake's mind, but he couldn't quite place it. Still, it didn't matter. The car, the suit, the confidence, they all screamed serious money. "Mr. Collins, we're honored. May I interest you in our latest arrivals? We just received—" Alexander lifted one hand, cutting the pitch short with quiet authority. "I'm here for a specific model," he said. "The Azure Coupe, midnight blue." Blake's face lit up. "Fantastic choice, sir. Extremely limited. Only 14 made worldwide this year. Let me personally walk you over to—" "I know where it is," Alexander said, his tone cool and firm. "My wife was here yesterday expressing interest in it." Blake's practiced smile stayed on his face, but a flicker of confusion danced behind his eyes. "Your wife? I'm not sure. I may have been in a meeting. Perhaps another associate assisted her?" Alexander's gaze sharpened. "No, Mr. Thompson. You assisted her, or more accurately, you refused to. Her name is Margaret Collins. She was wearing jeans and a plain white shirt. You suggested she might feel more at home browsing the used inventory." The blood visibly drained from Blake's face as recognition hit like a wave. Behind him, Daniel inhaled sharply. the realization spreading like wildfire. "Mr. Collins, Blake stammered, his confidence vanishing. "There must have been a mix-up. We welcome all types of customers here." By now, Richard Mason had stepped closer, drawn by the growing tension. "Is everything all right, Blake?" Alexander turned to the dealership owner. "You must be Mr. Mason," he said coolly. "Richard Mason. Yes, welcome to Boston Luxury Motors." "Thank you," Alexander replied, his voice even. "I was just informing your sales manager that my wife was here yesterday, hoping to purchase the Azure Coupe as a gift for her sister. Instead, she was treated in a way that I find deeply disappointing." Richard's face shifted from polite to worried in an instant. I believe I overheard part of that exchange, but I didn't realize the full context." Alexander nodded. "The context, Mr. Mason, includes your sales manager implying that someone like my wife didn't belong here, based solely on how she was dressed. Around them, other staff and early customers had stopped moving. The once buzzing showroom was dead silent. "Mr. Collins," Blake said, desperation cracking through his voice. "If there was any confusion—" "There wasn't," a voice interrupted. Daniel had stepped forward, visibly nervous but determined. "She was dismissed, sir. She was respectful, clear about what she wanted, and she was treated unfairly from the start because of how she looked." Blake shot him a glare that could cut glass, but it was too late. Alexander returned his gaze to Mason. "You know, it's interesting. My wife founded the Collins Foundation for Children with Disabilities. She's been building it for over a decade, long before I met her. It's raised more than $50 million for therapy equipment, adaptive classrooms, and outreach programs nationwide." He paused to let the gravity of that settle. "Maggie dresses simply because she chooses to stay grounded in the community she serves. Despite our resources, she believes modesty is a way to stay connected to the people she fights for every day. It's just one of the many reasons I admire her." Richard Mason stood speechless, his complexion pale. "Mr. Collins, I can't tell you how sorry I am. This is not how we operate. We strive to treat everyone with equal respect." "Statements are easy," Alexander replied calmly. "But culture shows in how people behave when no one is watching. Now, about the Azure. I came here to finalize that purchase for my wife's sister, as she originally planned. But I was also considering a large acquisition, 7 vehicles for our company fleet, and potentially several additions to my private garage." Blake looked like he'd been punched in the chest. Richard's eyes widened. A transaction like that would redefine their quarter, possibly their entire year. "However," Alexander added, pausing deliberately, "I'm not convinced this is the right place to invest that kind of capital." The tension hung heavy, suffocating. "Mr. Collins," Mason began, his voice barely steady, "please, allow us to make this right. This incident doesn't reflect who we are. Tell me what we can do." Alexander studied him for a beat, then said, "Maybe there's a path forward, but it would require more than just selling me cars." "Anything," Mason replied immediately. "We're listening." Alexander's tone softened slightly, though his presence remained firm. "The Collins Foundation is hosting a benefit gala next month. We're raising funds for a new adaptive sports complex for children with physical disabilities." Alexander turned toward the stunned sales manager. "Blake, I think it would be eye-opening for you to attend." Blake swallowed hard. "Of course, sir." Alexander's expression sharpened. "Not as a guest, as a volunteer. We always need extra hands to assist with logistics, to support the children, to witness what our mission really looks like up close." The message was crystal clear. This wasn't about cars anymore. It was about learning a deeper kind of value. Then addressing Richard Mason once again, Alexander added, "You may also want to consider introducing unconscious bias training for your staff. I can connect you with a few exceptional facilitators." Richard nodded quickly, eager to show his commitment. "Absolutely, we'd welcome that guidance." Turning now to Daniel, Alexander's tone softened. "I'd like you to manage the purchase, starting with the Azure, just as my wife intended." Daniel blinked. "Me? Sir? Thank you. I'd be honored." "Excellent," Alexander replied. "Now let's talk specifics about the corporate fleet." As he walked with Mason toward the office, Alexander paused beside the coupe and ran a hand along its flawless frame. "My wife has excellent taste. Wouldn't you agree?" Behind them, Blake stood frozen, his polished world unraveling. The weight of the moment settled in. His true character hadn't been exposed by how he treated the wealthy, but by how he had dismissed someone he assumed was not. 1 month later, the Collins Foundation Gala transformed Boston's Grand Hotel into a vibrant celebration of resilience. Families, physicians, donors, and children with disabilities filled the space with joy. Near the main entrance, wearing a volunteer's shirt instead of his usual tailored blazer. Blake guided guests and knelt beside a boy in a wheelchair, helping him reach the refreshment table. What had begun as damage control had become something else entirely. Each day spent volunteering at the foundation had peeled away another layer of his assumptions. And in that process, Blake found something unexpected: perspective. Across the ballroom, Maggie Collins, elegant yet modest in a simple navy dress, approached him with a warm smile. "How's it going, Blake?" she asked. He looked at her, not as a missed commission, but as someone whose quiet power had changed his life. "Humbling," he admitted, "and long overdue." Maggie nodded, glancing toward the boy beside him. "Thomas seems to like you." Blake chuckled. "He's been teaching me adaptive basketball. Apparently, I have terrible form." That made Maggie laugh genuinely. He's brutally honest. Blake's smile faded slightly as he grew serious. "Mrs. Collins, I know I've already apologized formally, but I need to say it directly. I was wrong. I judged you unfairly. I'm sorry." "You're right," she said, without bitterness. "There's no excuse. What matters is what you've learned." Blake nodded. "That someone's worth isn't defined by what they wear or what they own, and respect should be the starting point, not something earned after judgment." "Well said," Maggie replied. "A costly lesson, I'm sure." He offered a rueful smile. The lost business opportunity had stung, but the truth was clear. "Worth every dollar." Alexander joined them moments later, placing a hand gently on Maggie's shoulder. "Blake's just been telling me about his time here," she explained. Alexander gave a nod. "I heard you've taken quite an interest in the adaptive sports program." "Yes, sir," Blake replied. "Actually, I've signed up to keep volunteering after the event. And I've been working with Mr. Mason to rebuild how we approach new customers. No more profiling." Alexander considered that. "I'm glad to hear it," he said, then surprised Blake by adding, "That corporate fleet I mentioned, we're still in the market. Daniel tells me you've been mentoring him. Maybe you're the one to handle that purchase after all." Blake's jaw slackened for a moment, then he found his words. "That would be an honor, Mr. Collins. Truly." As the evening drew to a close, Blake watched Alexander and Maggie make their way across the ballroom, not flaunting their influence, but genuinely connecting with families, offering hugs, words of encouragement, and listening. A month earlier, he would have overlooked Maggie entirely. Now, he saw her for who she truly was, a woman of substance, whose quiet strength had opened his eyes. As he helped Thomas back into his wheelchair after a group photo, the boy beamed up at him. "You're pretty awesome for a grown-up," he said. Blake grinned. "That's the best compliment I've gotten in years, kiddo." And he meant it. We all make snap judgments, but as Blake Thompson learned, sometimes the most extraordinary people wear the simplest clothes, and real wealth has nothing to do with money. If this story touched something in you, hit that subscribe button and be part of our community of story lovers. Share your own experience in the comments. Have you ever been misjudged or learned something powerful from someone you overlooked? And remember, real integrity is shown not when the spotlight's on, but in how you treat someone when you think they don't matter. See you in our next story. Another lesson awaits.